Hi, so I've come to the woods to sit at the base of the tree to talk about anxiety, because I think it's a good place to talk about anxiety, because if I ever get anxiety I often come to the base of a tree and ground my energy a little bit. It's a very nice way to earth yourself and bring yourself back out of that anxious mind space. So I've just come here to demonstrate my physical movement that I do, which is walking from house to woods to sit at the tree to ground myself a little bit. And I'm just going to do this sort of very quick video about anxiety and how the yoga practice can help with anxiety. Because I've been seeing quite a lot of statuses on Facebook recently that everybody's struggling with, or lots of people are struggling with anxiety, and knowing how to sort of remove or let go or control the anxiety with yoga I find a very, very, very beneficial thing. I've struggled with anxiety for lots of my life, and yoga, or a regular practice of yoga, has massively reduced that anxiety, at times completely ridded my anxiety and depression, and allowed me to live a much more consciously aware life with a lot more joy instead of anxious head, which is surely what anybody with anxiety is absolutely dying to have, because I know how crippling it can be at times. So I'm just going to quickly talk about the yoga practice and some of the main things, some of the main benefits for removing anxiety, and why yoga is such a hugely up there practice for calming the mind and allowing you to come back to a much more happy, positive and joyful existence. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the yoga practice modulates the stress response in the body. And it does this because it starts to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system is our rest and digest part of the nervous system. And it's often out of balance in this day and age because we are very hyper aroused and overly stimulated through lack of contact with nature and over contact with phones, computers, noise, incessant movement in the wrong spaces sometimes, so crowds and all of that sort of thing. So we've got an imbalance in the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And what yoga does is it helps to balance out that state. So the parasympathetic nervous system gets a little bit left behind in this very fast-paced Western culture. And yoga just allows us to come back to generating that parasympathetic nervous system response. So that's one of the first things that yoga does to help with anxiety, is it helps to balance out the nervous system and modulates your stress response. The second thing that I want to talk about is yoga is a practice of moving into stillness. So I want to talk about the mind-body connection with yoga. And one of the reasons that we get anxious is because our mind and our body are not working coherently. And the mind and the body are basically entirely connected. Everything is connected. Specifically, the mind and the body are connected. And when they're working against each other, this can bring massive amounts of anxiety into the body and into the mind. So, for example, if your values are in something like kindness and joy and happiness, like most people's are or want to be, but you're acting through fear. So for example, say you are a naturally kind person, but because of your anxiety or your fear, let's call it, you've acted towards another person or towards yourself in an unkind way because of your anxious thoughts have driven you to be in a specific way. Towards yourself or towards others or whatever it is that you're struggling with, and you're a naturally kind person but you've acted maybe unkind towards yourself, then your body will get even more anxiety because of that, because you're acting against your values. So if your values are in kindness and your anxiety or your fear has driven you to act in an unkind way towards yourself, others, whatever it is, then your body, your nervous system can't handle that because it's something that's against your nature. So what yoga does is it connects the mind and body together and allows us to work as one. So our mind and body are working together to produce a much more wholesome life. If that makes sense. And the way that the yoga connects the mind and body together is it allows us to focus on things. So the breath, alignment of posture, so working into something with micro movements and aligning things physically connects us very spiritually, mentally, and allows the nervous system to revamp and rebalance, because we're bringing such awareness by channeling that energy through the mind, the body, the breath, where to put something, how to move something, how to energetically balance in a pose. This massively connects the mind and body and helps to rebalance the nervous system. And that will help to reduce anxiety hugely, because your body and your mind start to do the same thing. They're on the same page, which is always a good thing. The next thing I want to talk about is yoga brings you into the present moment. So when you're suffering with anxiety or depression, like I say, I've been there before, especially with depression. I've been there. I've managed to get rid of it through the practice of yoga and mindfulness and meditation. But when I always seem to describe yoga and depression and anxiety as these two different things, or I say this to myself because this is how I found it easier to break up in my head. Depression for me was when I was stagnant and thinking about the past. So it was reoccurring past things that had happened in the past that I was bringing into the present. So that's what was depression for me, was an inability to be able to let go of the past. And anxiety I found is a inability to let go of what's happening in the future. So I always put these two things separately. Both of them are the same thing. They both are under the bracket of fear. But if we're to put them into spaces, which I like to do, find it easier to decompartmentalise things, to get rid of them, or to help control them, if that's the way to describe it. So if depression is the past and thinking about things that have happened in the past, and anxiety is the future and worrying about what might happen in the future, and what if this happens, or what if I go there and this happens, what if I go to this social event and this happens, and what if I get unhealthy and my life's disastrous and this happens. And so this is what creates that terrible anxiety. So these what ifs and scared of the future. So if depression is a feeling of being in the past, and anxiety is a feeling of what happens if this happens in the future, if we're to decompartmentalise them for a little bit more ease in our mind, then both of these spaces that we're living in is not the present moment. And fear, anxiety and depression, which is fear, can't actually exist in the body when you are present, because it only exists in the past and the future. It only exists in a space that's not present. And what yoga does is yoga brings you back to the present moment by concentrating on the breath, the movement of the body, connecting that mind and body together, and constantly bringing the awareness, and it's an awareness practice, it's a mindfulness practice, back to what you are doing on the mat. So move finger there, put the hips up, balance, breathe. Yeah, when you're thinking about all these micro little movements in yoga, challenge. We don't work into these stupid bendy postures for nothing. We're doing it to challenge our body mentally and physically, and the breath, so that we don't have to move to those spaces of annoyance, past and future. None of these things even exist. The past doesn't exist anymore. The future never did exist. Tomorrow's promised to nobody. So you may as well be here now. Oh, I'm getting a scratchy bum now in this. Probably 1,000 midge bites, but hey ho. I got them yesterday as well, so it's fine. Yes, so yoga brings you back to the present moment and allows you to experience life in a much more aware and present state, which is very hard for anxiety and depression to live in that presence, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's another massive benefit for yoga and anxiety. Also, the last couple of things I just want to talk about. One of them is fear. So what yoga does is it allows you to face your fears. And one of the main things that helps me to get rid of my anxiety is when I face my anxiety, not run away from it. So I follow a lot of sort of Tony Robbins stuff, just for all sorts of stuff, business development, and I just like his big boundy energy. Do you know what I mean? And he said one time that to help get rid of this woman's anxiety and phobia and fear around a snake, the best way to do things is to physically give you that fear. So he just wrapped a big snake around the woman's body, Kundalini snake. And previous to that, her psychotherapist, she was having for years, it took 7 years to help her even progress slightly with that fear of the snake, whereas Tony Robbins got rid of it like that because he wrapped the snake around her body, and that was her worst nightmare. And so if you give yourself, you sometimes face that fear, so like go to the social situation, or do the thing that you fear the most, and allow yourself to sit with it and breathe with it and feel it. And then if you've done the worst thing, your most fearful thing, then it's very hard for that to exist in your body because you've done it. And yoga really, really helps to allow yourself to sit with your mind. Sometimes that's the most fearful thing for people, to sit in stillness with their own thoughts, because they're so bloody awful that you don't tend to want to sit there. So actually coming to the mat and sitting with yourself and your own thoughts is hugely, hugely beneficial for allowing those thoughts that are detrimental to remove out of your psyche, out of your nervous system, out of your body. And the last thing I'm going to talk about of how yoga will massively benefits to get rid of anxiety and depression is it's a form of exercise. And exercise is one of the most beneficial things you can do to help with anxiety and depression. Firstly, it brings actually new growth into the brain, so new brain cells are made, which helps. It's anti-aging, it helps to stop fatigue, so that stopping of fatigue, the need to sleep, is one of the main feelings of feeling anxious and depressed, is a lack of the most quality of sleep. So exercise helps to stimulate this new brain cell growth to help with that lack of sleep. It brings more oxygen into the brain, and that oxygenated brain and that oxygenated body again helps to rebalance the nervous system, the psyche, the mind and the body connection. And that's it really. So that's just what I wanted to talk to you guys, because I've suffered with such bad anxiety and depression through a lot of my life, and yoga literally saved my life. So I just want to give the practice of yoga to as many people as possible, or just let people know how life-changing it is. Yeah. Thanks guys, thanks for listening to my jabber for a while. Namaste.